Okay, morning. I wasn't there in the earlier sessions, but I suppose, you all would have been taken through a lot of APTs and the modern attacks that enterprises are facing. I've got a very interesting topic, which Rachit, had spoken to me. State-sponsored attacks. Easy on the lips, very difficult to understand. A lot of people really have not got what is this thing called a state-sponsored attacks, right? So I'll cover a bit of that. What are state-sponsored attacks, and then get down to to answer should CISOs be concerned. Now, the answer to should CISOs be concerned would actually fall under two things, right? A CISO should say, am I a target of these state-sponsored attacks? So my presentation, I will actually cover, is he at target? And then second question that the CISO should be asking in his concern is there a general deterioration in the environment, in the threat landscape? If both these are yes, he is in dire straits. Having said this, state-sponsored attacks, fundamentally revolve around evolution of warfare. Started with land, water, air, space. Conventional warfare. Anyway, before that, I just thought I must put this before moving ahead. And he's very succinctly captured, where he says we have state-sponsored attacks going after private sector. This says it all, actually. Having said this, as I was saying, the state-sponsored information warfare activities, of which cyber warfare is one of it, right, has been a consequence of evolution of warfare from land, water, air, and space, where in the conventional warfare, states used three techniques, basically: blast, heat, or fragmentation, to bring down physical targets like tanks, people, etc. This also parallelly, gave way to another form of warfare called the information warfare, which were more military specific. And these attacked human perception, which was command and control warfare, where in the battlefield, the communication with the generals and the top management is actually cut off. Or electronic warfare, where you had jammers, etc., which were used. Or deceptions where say, for example, in the Indo-Pak War, there was landings actually organized near Porbandar by the Navy and the Air Force and Army, right, to deceive the Pakistanis to believe that the attack would come from Porbandar, and Pakistanis actually moved their armies down, right, whereas there is a pure deception thing. Psychological warfare, where where the US had dropped leaflets in the Iraq war to actually bring down the morale, fighting morale of thing. But all these actually have now given way to a different form of warfare because of our movement into the new space, that's cyberspace. This fundamentally is where we are talking, and state-sponsored attacks now are more in this domain. That means states are sponsoring cyber warfare, whereas the other four of them, though information warfare, right, were more military specific. Now, cyber warfare also attacks physical objects and information. In the information domain, essentially it attacks the CIA, right? The C is cyber espionage, cyber theft, and the A, that's availability, right, is cyber sabotage. Now, what is the difference between cyber espionage and theft? Very clearly, espionage is more dealing with state secrets, that's political, military, and diplomatic, whereas theft is more tactical and economic in perspective, where you have commercial secrets, intellectual property, trade, RFP codes, product designs, launch dates of products, etc. These kind of things are what are stolen from corporates. Then, of course, sabotage is deny, destroy, modify information. Like the last attack in December on Saudi Aramco, right, by the malicious software, the virus Shamoon, essentially was a sabotage where it cleaned off the hard disk of 30,000 of the Saudi Arabian Aramco's machines, fundamentally attributed to Iran because they had this problem with Saudi, right? And 40% of Saudi's GDP actually related to Aramco's product produced, which produces, apart from other things, 1/10 of the world's oil. So that was a sabotage, cyber sabotage. Whereas when you come to the physical domain, there are clearly two parts. One is direct attack on the computing environment through electromagnetic pulse. You have HERF guns, etc., or conventional attacks on data centers, etc. So for example, the direct physical attack is destroy computing facilities, through high energy waves where the chips are burnt off, or data centers are attacked physically, and supervisory control loss here, where you have attacks that are indirect, where like SCADA, attacks are indirect attacks. So this fundamentally is where state-sponsored attacks exist. Now, when do these attacks take place? That's the question which CISOs generally grapple with. Does state-sponsored attacks only happen during conflicts or during combat? Does it happen during peacetime? Right? Should states be indulging in state-sponsored attacks during peacetime? Let's see that. If you see the conflict timeline, conflicts between countries, start with normal relations. When things go bad, there are diplomatic dual conflicts, etc., which then aggravates to economic sanctions and blockade, and finally you have the physical combat. That's the life cycle of conflicts in a timeline. Right? Cyber warfare maps very seamlessly with this. This is how the cyber warfare actually happens. If you see the thing, there are 4 things that are happening during normal relations, friendly relations between countries. Cyber profiling, we'll see what cyber profiling is. Cyber profiling and cyber seeding, right, happens all the time. It happens right from normal relations to physical combat. Once the profiling and seeding is done, comes theft and espionage, which again starts at normal relations, it goes on. Cyber sabotage, that's the information attacks. Those ones start somewhere at the end of the diplomatic duel and conflict, when things have gone really bad and before economic sanctions start. You find information cyber sabotage is starting there. And then when there is actual physical combat, declared war and conflict, that's when physical cyber sabotage happens. This is the life cycle of the thing. I'm talking about the life cycle of state-sponsored attacks. You also have terrorists, cyber terrorists, indulging in physical cyber sabotage right at the normal relations. Cyber terrorists, hacktivists, and cyber extortionists have been known, and there are cases when they've indulged in cyber sabotage right at the peacetime. But this is a timeline for state-sponsored attacks. Now, when you look at cyber profiling, it's very simple, where there's a detailed profiling and inventorization of government, public, and private sector, and then targets are selected. Right? And seeding is, after the targets are selected, to those ones that need to be actually compromised, backdoors are put in for theft and espionage, and very importantly, logic bombs, which can be triggered when the cyber sabotage stage starts. It's lying dormant in infrastructures, which is just activated when needed, like our INSAT 1C, right? was actually like, had I don't know how many of you all know this case. Once, our inside, once he went down, it just stopped functioning. The camera stopped functioning one fine day, right? It is presumed that, that a Western power triggered or activated the logic bomb to like finish off, right? So that was actually seeded much before in time, during peacetime, normal relations. Now, having said these phases, right, what is the CISO's concern first? See, because here, we are talking about the target selection. So as a CISO, his first concern is, am I a target here, right? That's the first thing, right? Now, for answer to this, am I a target, is what are the targets that state-sponsored attacks actually go after? Very clearly, critical infrastructure, right? Because that is what will bring a nation on. Critical infrastructure, government, right? Political organizations are actually gone after quite vehemently by state-sponsored attackers. Military and defense industry, R&D organizations. And where we come into the picture is manufacturing organizations and corporates that have patents or high value intellectual property. That's again picked up out there. And all these are not the only ones. Right in the center of them are those which are directly and indirectly linked contractors, consultants, and supply chain organizations that support these peripheral ones. So there is an indirect access. That means they get into the support organizations, and from there they move on into the thing. Therefore, third-party security and policies become crucial, because you might put whatever kind of protection within your own infrastructure, but the attacks are going to come in through your partners who are and your supply chain. You need to focus on that. Now, having said this, what is the second concern? Right? Is the threat environment deteriorating overall? Because even if a CISO's organization is not in a direct target of state-sponsored attacks, right? If the environment per se has deteriorated, there is concern for him, because he is going to get hit, if not by state-sponsored attacks, by some other attacks, right? Let's see how state-sponsored attacks are actually deteriorating environment. If you look at this particular thing, it's a seems to be a very busy slide, but actually there are two parts. One is the nation states. What are they doing? They are actually having advanced research on zero-day vulnerabilities and developing military-grade exploits, which is on the right side, right? They're also moving on into advanced malware tools, sophisticated profiling that is supported by on-ground spying, basically. They have got their resources in other countries, like say India, RAW, or Mossad, etc. You get information from that, and they're profiling the thing. And then all these nation states today, most of the countries have the cyber commands. Now that's as far as what the nation states are doing. But then parallelly, there is this huge criminal supply chain, which basically falls into three categories. Their criminals are doing a huge amount of R&D and developing their own exploits and zero-day vulnerabilities. They're putting in place infrastructure that actually is delivery mechanisms, like botnets, cloud VMs. A lot of these cloud providers have got hacked in. The virtual machines out there are now being sold by these people as infrastructure, because you need to have collection servers. When egress of your data it goes out into these VMs that are sold. Then you have proxies, etc. Then you have malware tools as infrastructures, where you have a whole range of malware that's available. And also, which is a development in the last 2.5 to 3 years, mule networks have come up, and they're out for sale. The last attack which happened, $43 million heist, right? People actually withdrew from 40 odd countries simultaneously. Now that's a huge network. It's a mule network that was organized and bought by those 7 guys who actually created that heist, right? They actually leveraged a mule network. So those are the kind of infrastructures available there. And then you have operations in the supply chain where you have markets here. Attack, all the zero-day exploits are all sold, credit card, debit card, like someone had just mentioned, Bala had mentioned about 6,000 of ICICI banks being sold and they got the information. That's all happening in the marketplace. IP, intellectual property and trade secrets are being sold. And this is again a development which has happened in the last 3 years. Company and individual profiles and access credentials are being sold. There are these gangs out there who are focusing on doing social media analysis, and they say, okay, if it's an ICICI bank, who are the people from ICICI bank in the social media? And they're doing all the profiling there and keeping it ready for sale. That means someone who wants to use the services, they don't even waste time. They say, we already have it here. This. And then you have the for-hire groups and mercenaries. So basically, at one time, hacktivists, gangs and corporates were using them. Today, nation states are also leveraging this supply chain to do the delivery of those advanced malware, etc., that they have got. Now, what is all this happening? What's the impact of this on CISOs here? Very clearly this. Huge amount of funds are flowing in, making criminal activity much more lucrative than what it was. It was already lucrative, but now with nation states going in, pushing a lot of money, it's become more lucrative, right? There is inter-criminal gang competition to to better their malware so that they are chosen. It's actually competition. A nation state will go to a gang which has got better malware, better delivery, better infrastructure. So there is again competition, and they're going and creating more and more sophisticated malwares here. Many of these gangs have got what you call pre-breach, as many companies as possible to build attractive portfolio targets. As I said, credentials and profiles, etc., are already created. They're breached in this thing. And large sophisticated command and control botnets, massive malware distribution, and nation-level DDoS capability, which I think Arbor is out here. They will be able to tell. We experienced, the world witnessed the largest DDoS attack 2 months back, 2.5 months back. Maybe they will cover this. But these are all being delivered by these kind of delivery infrastructures. When it comes to the nation states per se, they're developing advanced malware and exploits, right, at their national labs and R&D centers. Very, importantly and of great concern is that for them to deliver these to their potential targets, it is possibly being shared with criminals. That's why you find variants of Stuxnets, variants of Flame, etc., coming up, which were purely military grade exploits there. But now they're coming up into things because of the sharing. All this has actually created an environment, a threat environment. That's of great concern. So, environment is compromised, right? You could be the target, right? Now, in this compromised environment, mass attacks have given way to surgically precise targeted attacks. That's why you said targeted attack. Hit and run attacks to persistent get in and stay attacks. APTs, they're in and they continue to stay there. Mass scale breaches, as we talked about pre-breaches and other things. Most of the organizations have been breached. If someone thinks they have not been breached, actually they are literally living in a fool's paradise in today's world, right? Now the question is, they might be breached, but data might not be going on. They're breached, they're available, they're ready to be sold to whoever wants now. That means breached organizations themselves are being sold, right? What is the bottom line for CISOs? Right? Very clearly, current infrastructures have become totally obsolete and ineffective. You need to have advanced threat platforms like FireEye. I think there was a presentation by FireEye, etc. Mandiant. Many of you all may have read the Mandiant report on the Chinese APT attacks. Dambala. These are the three I can think of. Airtel, we are going in for FireEye as our preferred advanced threat platform. Then there's a need for like focus shift from protective to detective and reactive controls for the sole reason in today's like environment you can't protect, right? Your technological controls are almost obsolete here, right? So when you can't protect, at least you should be able to detect and respond to the thing, right? And like Gartner's thing is right, by 2017, 75% of CISOs of breach enterprises will be fired for not having implemented adequate detection and response controls. Third, transform the current enterprise security models, which are absolutely outdated, fortress, airport, and those kind of models to context-aware, adaptive, and intelligence-based models. If that is not done, no controls can be face the kind of influx of attacks that are coming in, and shift the balance towards behavioral controls. You have technological controls and behavioral controls. The focus was always towards technological controls, but since we have seen that they are not being effective, look at moving the balance towards behavioral controls, and you need to have people-centric security. They are the first and the last line of defense in this environment. So the answer to that, should CISOs be concerned? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felix. That was very comprehensive. All right. So, Vinod, I want to ask you. You've probably been dealing with a lot of CISOs in India. And my question is fairly straightforward. Are they really concerned about state-sponsored attacks? And if yes, what are they doing about it? And if no, do you think they should be concerned?
Yeah, thank you. So, just before we get into that, I just want to take some examples of these state-sponsored attacks that we have had to manage or monitor over the last 2 to 2.5 years. Because just before I come to India, the Middle East happens to have been a hotbed in the last 2.5 years on the state-sponsored attacks. There's been a lot of crossfire between different nations. Many different things have happened. So just to get a perspective in terms of what's been some of our practical experiences looking at this. Jan 2012, we started seeing a lot of spike in the attacks happening on some of the banks and telcos that we manage in Saudi Arabia. So, and it wasn't a surprise for us because 2 weeks back, before we started seeing the attacks, the Saudi Arabia had actually done a lot of state-sponsored attacks on Israel. They had brought down the airlines website. Some of the operations got impacted. They had compromised some of the banks, taken out the credit card details, posted it out on websites. Of course, it's never a claim. Nobody claims that the government did it, but it's always some or the other, organizations within Saudi Arabia that would claim. But it was fairly obvious that it was a state-sponsored attack. So 2 weeks later, it was an expected retaliation that happened from Israel. Israel is not going to keep quiet, if you go in and because they have some of the most advanced cyber armies in the world. So it was a retaliation. A lot of attacks happened on telcos that we were managing, the banks that we were managing, stock exchanges. So this incident was more of, it was not really a very focused espionage or theft or sabotage. It was more of a general dissent kind of attack over a seasonal, politically volatile environment at that point in time. But the end result was, even in Saudi Arabia, a lot of stock exchanges got affected, some banks got affected. So it was a fairly, it was very clear that there were two states at war, but through the medium of cyber war. And incidentally, that was Jan 2012. August 2012, saw the, like what Felix was mentioning, Aramco's, 35,000 desktops going down on the same day. So, August 15th, 2012, 11 a.m., around 11 a.m. in the morning is when it started. 30,000 desktops went dead because the boot sectors of those hard disks of the desktops were overwritten by an image of a burning American flag using the malware. So basically the hard disks were of no use. 30,000 people, the hard disks had to be replaced. So it was productivity loss for around 2 weeks for an average of around 30,000 employees. I mean, you can imagine the kind of impact that it would have had. So why did this happen? The precursor to that was sometime before that, Saudi had announced that they are going to increase their oil production. So obvious impact was there on Iran. And so though again there is no direct evidence that relates back, but it was circumstantial evidence which fairly clear that it was an Iran-sponsored cyber attack that had happened, which led to this state at Aramco. And Aramco is one of those organizations which has state-of-the-art security technologies and practices at any point in time. I mean, they are not an easy target by any means. So it was a combination of an internal insider having some level of admin privileges, but once the malware was triggered off, there was no stopping it. 2 weeks later, another oil and gas company in Qatar, exactly same kind of incident started happening. So by then, of course, the learnings were there, so it was easier to manage the incident, kind of cope up and get back on feet much faster. So that was a very classic example of what we could call as cyber sabotage. Both these was clear-cut cyber sabotage affecting an enterprise. So I would really say that the CISOs should be worried. I mean, it's not a faraway impact that we are talking about. The third part was, I happened to meet the CISO of Mandiant in a security conference about a month back in South Africa. So they were the ones who had come up with that Mandiant report, which talked about a group called APT-1, which was heavily linked into People's Liberation Army in China. So it was one of the 64 such groups which they knew existed in China, which were completely focused on IP theft. I mean, at least as per the allegations from them, it is only on US or more on the US side, IP theft being done. And the impact was over a period of 3-4 years, these groups have been working at multiple, organizations within the US in terms of taking out the IP. And the CISO there was, the Mandiant CISO was very clear that their studies show that it's not just a state-sponsored initiative from China, but for Chinese, it is like a competitive advantage. The fact that even if there is a joint, so their observations were, even if there is a joint venture that a Chinese firm has with any other organization, globally, one of the mechanisms that they gain competitive advantage is through this kind of infiltration, which means you take a lot of IP and data out, and that gives them much more leverage in managing the particular contract better. So our experience, we managed to monitor and manage a joint venture of such nature in South Africa. So we have consistently seen that the malware impact or the so-called APT kind of attacks happening in that kind of an environment leading to cyber theft is fairly on the higher side, compared to some of the other organizations. So I mean, whether you want to link that back to a Chinese kind of infiltration or that's again circumstantial kind of evidence. But so these were some clear-cut examples of nation-state attack impacting an enterprise directly. Now, so if you come into the Indian context, if you take some of those things like say cyber espionage, if you take as an example, or cyber theft. So as a nation state thing, I would think that the government should be really worried, because that's a very direct impact in terms of a lot of data that, some of our neighbors would be very happy to take away. But if you ask me about enterprise, on an immediate note, I would possibly say it's a yellow. That's my feel, not a red, because India, fortunately or unfortunately, is not a very IP-driven country, as of date. There are companies with a lot of good IP, but not like the US. So if somebody had to spend time, they would rather, go out into US and try to grab IP rather than focus on us. But if you look at the cyber sabotage part, I think that's a clear case where in India the CISOs are worried and should be worried, because the sabotage in Aramco happened overnight. It was not as if, it was not an expected kind of impact. So to that extent, if some of our neighbors are unhappy and there is a political turmoil happening, etc., it is quite possible that some of the larger infrastructure, or like Felix was saying, the critical national infrastructure, could easily be subject to such kind of a mass attack. As regards to the other organizations, I think we are already seeing, Commonwealth, when it happened, there were a lot of attacks between India, China, Pakistan on that infrastructure. And there are consistent attacks that happen from China, Pakistan, etc. onto the enterprises in India. But not to the impact of an APT as so far that we have seen. And the other side we should also be worried is about the collateral impact. So when US spends billions of dollars and creates something called Stuxnet, which is a highly advanced malware, the collateral impact for an enterprise is the same code gets stolen, gets rewritten by cyber criminals, and gets reoriented back into the enterprise, for other things like theft of maybe banking credentials, IP or business plans of organizations, etc. So that impact is a collateral impact which you should be really worried about, because the more the more the nations are going to spend in terms of coming up with sophisticated malware. This year, NSA had an increase of $1 billion in terms of creating, these kind of cyber weapons. So to that extent, if very sophisticated malware is getting created by all of these nations, there will be a collateral impact in terms of more sophisticated malware generally hitting the enterprise. So to that extent, the APTs can become more and more complex for the enterprise to manage. So that's about what I had to say.
All right, thank you. And now, Subramaniam, as a CISO looking at this daily, what are some of the things that you can do to prevent certain infiltrations from a state-sponsored or, let's say, an organized attack?
First, good to hear from Vinod that we are still, the country, we are in yellow stage. The enterprises are still in yellow and not in red as of yet. Generally, as Narayan had put it in the morning, we don't know what we don't know. So the best thing to do is to increase the hygiene, increase the security levels, do your log monitoring properly, get more serious on what you call network traffic monitoring. Also, look at anomalies, peaks and troughs, see why it's happening, have a closer look at it. Then also have people who can help you for quick response. Quick response is very important. As Felix was putting it, nearly most of us are already compromised. If that is true, what we need to do is to only gather strength to respond quickly. Maybe there should be a collaborative effort for this. The managed security services and experts in the field, we need to engage with them, and maybe during the time of contract itself have some clauses where we can take their help at the time of such disasters. Then that is from the CISO's part, but from the banking part, I think we should focus more on the anti-money laundering and terrorist funding initiatives. Here, risk-based transaction monitoring, where technology can help, where artificial intelligence and kind of technologies can be used to see whether any particular transaction which is happening may be carrying higher risk than the rest. And we can even, at a real time, we can stop such transactions. Then increase KYC. This is another issue where we find that all said and done, the fund gets transferred through the banking system and it reaches terrorists. Now, how to strengthen the know your customer norms. Recently we had this Cobra post where we had seen that the KYC process of banks have to improve so that we stop such kind of funding of terrorists. Then a bank should also be part of this critical infrastructure initiative of the government now, where they've identified certain industries to be critical infrastructure. A bank may be just giving loans and taking deposits, but if a bank stops, or if even a single bank, a major bank stops, there will be entire effect on the banking system and critical infrastructure. That's why it's become a critical infrastructure. The avalanche effect will have that entire economic process will slow down if a couple of banks go down for some reason, be it technology, be it any other kind of, let us say, bad performance of banks will have a certain effect on the economy, because there is an avalanche effect. One bank fails to pay, the other banks which have to get money from that also will not be able to do that business properly. So it's both. It should be attacked from both sides. From the banking side, you'll have to strengthen your AML, you have to strengthen your KYC, and from the information security side, just like when we have a fever and we don't know what fever is it, we try to take all other precautions. We strengthen all other immune systems. So similarly, we'll have to do that in the security space.
The other aspect is that, which Felix also referred to, is that there are these rats or remote access trojans. There's a free market available out there, so anyone can go and buy malware or malware which is already planted in an infiltrated organization. So the barrier to entry in this market has kind of reduced. It's kind of very easy. If you have money, you can buy the most advanced malware which is already infiltrated into an organization. And that there are these large organized groups which also provide more and more services. And if as a CISO, you are one entity fighting against such a large, organized, near infinite, resourced criminal, do you expect a certain kind of regulatory environment or help from the government to fight such a, like you mentioned KYC, a lot of the things that you were alluding to were about a regulatory framework or an environment that you were operating in. Also, you mentioned that your third party is where most of the attacks originate from. These are parties that you trust and work with. So these are probably questions to all three of you, and you can take a shot at it, is to what kind of an environment do you expect and what kind of support do you expect from the government in this?
I would say that the government requires the private sector support rather than the other way around, because more than 80% of the critical infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector, right? And that's why the government is pushing public-private partnership, right? They want our support, right? Others, they can't handle this thing on their own.
I feel government can chip in other ways, like they can have, there should be a general increase in the security levels among all age groups, especially the young ones. I think government should be able to start courses on information security, and there should be also a generic public awareness campaign for increasing the security levels. For example, most of these attacks have happened because of social engineering, then spear phishing. All this could have been stopped if the person who was handling that particular desk knew that such things are happening and we should not compromise on those things. Here is a basic gap is on awareness. And I think government as a central body, it's an imperative for them to increase the awareness of the general public, and especially those who are the young ones, maybe through specific courses and public awareness campaigns. I think there government can chip in. And also government, with this initiative of the critical infrastructure, there should be collaborative effort, let's say if the telecom sector is attacked, indirectly the banking sector is also attacked, because all our branches are connected through the telecom network. For some reason, if there is any compromise there, it's going to affect the entire ecosystem there. So I feel that government as a top level should be able to have some collaborative effort between all these players so that there can be a united and a forceful defense of all these mechanisms.
Okay. You want to add to that? Sorry.
Yeah, so I think more than slightly deviating more than regulatory, I feel that government should invest on certain bodies which can really take out or enable the private sector to fight this kind of organized cybercrime. Because if you look at the US or UK, you have these organizations like the FBI, or in UK the SOCA and all those kind of organizations which are really equipped, knowledgeable, and the ecosystem is much more well built to be able to handle a crime when it occurs. Whereas here, I still know that even if you know that a cybercrime has happened, if you really want to take action against those who have done it, it's where do you go to complain? I mean, they would say that yeah, you have cyber cell and police stations, but believe me, it's a very long drawn process and nobody really wants to go to that. So it's difficult. So that's, I think, one area where there should be government support. The other, I think, is also to have some kind of centralized body where the learnings can be shared, because invariably there will be more and more complex attacks happening as we go forward. But if it has happened in one bank or one other organization, without sharing too much of details, but is there a learning that can be shared which can then get distributed in a more detailed way across organizations, which I think is again lacking, which could, in my opinion, vertical organizations could do it, like banking organizations, central organizations, etc. But I think will need government support in doing that.
Are there any questions from the audience on this? There's one there. Can we have a mic? Right, so please introduce yourself and then behind Akhilesh.
I'm NC Jain from Air India, taking forward the issue of government support. Government of India, because we are also a PSU, Government of India has an agency called CERTAIN to take care of all these issues. I happened to attend one of the meeting. That took place about 2 years back, and the agenda was that every PSU needs to implement this in their own organization, and the meeting never took place after that. This is the seriousness of the government, and CERTAIN is headed by the bureaucratic environment. I don't think government is very serious. They have an attitude of chalta hai. They sit and discuss the matter and get away. And most of the threats which are there in the government divisions, they don't come out in the press. It is happening across the industry. So there is a need for independent agency to do this kind of function, and all government agencies, all government departments must be audited, not by leading companies like we have few companies in India who are given government business. It may be TCS, Infosys, Wipro, very limited, and the people working there are also like government. So there need to be a very, I don't know what.
Right. I think this is more of a comment, yeah. Right? So thank you. That's a very brave comment to make in this gathering. Thank you. I think Felix had a response to that.
Just to take on from where you said that the government has just been making noises. It isn't really so. I think India is one of those countries where a lot has been done by the government in terms of cybersecurity, preparedness. For one, we have an organization, an apex body, which is the National Security Council, right, with the National Security Advisor personally involved in cybersecurity initiatives of the country. Right? There is, as I said, public-private partnership policy was released by the National Security Advisor on 16th of October of last year. This is the first country in the world where there has been a formal structure put in place where the industry and the government body together are taking part in policy making, which is what is called the Joint Working Group on Cybersecurity, which is a major departure from what we see in even the Western countries, where industry opinions are taken, but they're never part of the policy making governing bodies. So to that extent, India is way ahead of others. More than that, when we're talking of what support we need from the government, it's in terms of policies. Like say, for example, it's crucial in cybersecurity, and especially state-sponsored attacks, for a country to project strength. Many of you all would have heard of this thing called as MAD, mutual assured destruction, in the nuclear this thing. That means you're now putting out a perspective that if you attack us, we're going to hit back. And that the capability to project a country's intent and strength to hit back, to detect, to go after these people, right, is very important, and that comes from the government. Industry cannot do that. Second, a lot of requirements in cybersecurity areas relate to international cooperation. Right? Attacks are coming in from across the globe. You need to relate with other countries, etc. Can't be done by industry. It has to be a government to government understanding and collaborations. That again, the government is very important. And then of course, the earlier one which I said, we need to have very clear policy of response. Are we going to hit back on a person who is attacked, right? Even when in cyberspace, attributability is always at doubt, right? So when attributability of an attack is at doubt, what is the government's policy, right, on hitting back? These are aspects that only the government level can do. Having said this, the government today is doing a lot in a crucial area of cybersecurity, and that is supply chain robustness. Most of the attacks, say while you have attacks coming in from networks, etc., but it's much easier for these interested parties to subvert your hardware and software, right? Put Trojans right at the hardware part. Many of you all would have heard 40% of the Cisco equipment sold in America are fakes, right? Many of them from China, were all with pre-built backdoors there. You don't need to attack through Trojans on it. It's already there. And that is why there is in telecom sector, now the government is mandating all equipment that comes into telecom sector to go through 3GPP standards, and all IT related equipment in telecom sector to pass through the common criteria standards. Now therefore this is another area which is getting mandated, and it will come in through all the critical infrastructure. Secondly, the government is building what you call the centers of excellence in 5 areas: in mobile security, network security, lawful interception, encryption. Encryption is a major area in cyber security, and policies and things. So those centers of excellence are coming up. They are putting in place capability enhancement and building. There will be undergraduate and graduate courses in cybersecurity. Most of the IITs have now been asked to start this. IIMs have got are starting cybersecurity management courses, because not only do you have to have technical skills, but you need to have management skills. So both IIMs and IITs are starting this. Schools and schools are right at the school. CII. Yesterday I was in a meeting at CII, because I'm also the co-chair of the CII Cybersecurity Initiative, this thing committee. The CII has got what you call the skills initiative, where mass amount of people are being taught skills on various trades. So there cybersecurity issues are going to get imparted as a module. Schools are going to, NCERT is being talked to, so that there will be the NCERT books that come up will have simple introductions to security and cybersecurity, how to use the internet properly, etc., right at the children age, so that you have the people awareness, etc. So a lot of things are actually happening, is what I'm trying to say.
It'll have to be a quick one because...
I'll do it quickly. What Mr. Vinod said, that government should be visible. The public perception of physical security in the country itself is at a question mark.
All right.
We are talking about the cyber security. The public perception about what he referred is fundamentally that it's not visible to the public. We are talking about security within the company, information security, but is it visible to the public, customers? Like net banking, what happened in Greece? The public confidence is gone. What are we doing? I mean, the visibility to the customer or to the public should also be one major parameter to handle this.
All right. So thank you. I take those concerns and I thank you for raising that point and I thank you for clarifying a lot of the initiatives that have been taken up by the government. We've run out of time, so I'll need to end this session. If there are any questions, please ask during lunch.